Hi, Dev.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. How are you?
Every day is better than the day before.
Are you sure?
No. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I have a bit of a croaky voice, so just ignore my croaky voice. But luckily, I'm not the singer. You are.
Yeah, this is true, man. But luckily, I don't have to sing today, so my croaky voice will also be forgiven.
So how are you feeling right now? Like you've got this album coming out, 26 albums in.
I'm good, man. I've got so Powernerd is the first of four records, and it's very much like Devin Townsend project that I did back in 2010 kind of thing, except it's 15 years later.
Mhm.
And it's been a very difficult couple of years, and the process of making Power Nerd was very difficult. But all things considered, things have been really good, man.
Yeah. So you say it's been difficult. What were the big challenges for you with this one?
Well, I mean, with this record, it started as being something that was more like a peace offering to the tolerant audience of something that's a little more straightforward and a little less weird. And in the beginning, that's what it was meant to be. It was supposed to be a very straightforward, fun sort of party record that introduces this next period of my work in a more easy way. But during the making of this record, my family and I went through a bunch of scenarios that were very difficult. And so Power Nerd ended up being a much more melancholy statement than I ended up anticipating. Uh, but that being said, all the records and all the music that I do are essentially meant to be, if they're done correctly, simply a representation of what my year has been like, what the last couple of years have been like. And so, with that in mind, Power Nerd is exactly what it was supposed to be.
You said that it's one of the most important things you've done in your career.
Hmm.
Do you still feel that?
Yeah. I think it's less even about the musical side of it, but more about the tenacity that it took to complete this record while my family was dealing with grief. I think that the function of this for me as an artist uh, really became a testament to willpower from myself and everybody involved. Because there was a certain moment there that I thought I can't finish this. It's too much. My life is too much right now. But pushing through that and creating something that, in a best case scenario, could benefit a listener who has gone through a similar thing makes it one of the most important things that I've done. I just didn't think I was going to be able to finish it, and but we did.
Yeah, you did. Well,
Yeah.
congratulations on getting it finished, and I'm
Thank you.
sorry to hear that you had to go through some stuff.
We all
Um,
get older, man. It's like it seems to be more common than it used to be, right?
yeah, the only thing worse than getting older is when you stop getting older.
It's when he's. That's true. That's true. Yeah, that's true. What was the quote that I heard the other day? It was, "In the end, it's okay, and if it's not okay, it's not the end." I thought that was good.
Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, we'll get philosophical.
Yeah,
Philosophical.
man. Yeah. Or no, it's not philosophy. It's Hallmark greeting cards.
So, what do you think you learned about yourself during the making of this record?
That up to this point, my connection to my emotional health and my emotional intelligence has been very surface. And what I mean by that is, I think in the past I've dealt with trauma or I've dealt with difficult situations by just thinking about it, like intellectualizing it, so I can express what I'm feeling. I can say, okay, well, this reaction that I have is indicative of this, and this. It's like if you think about it enough, in a sense, you never really have to participate in it. And I think up to this point, I hadn't realized that. But by going through the making of this record hand in hand with the loss of loved ones, you recognize that when the grief gets to a point where it's it's more than you can handle, then you have no choice but to just surrender to it, I guess. And what I learned from being forced to deal with real emotions is that it's a healthy thing. And in fact, a lot of what I've been feeling in the past was based on repressing emotions. So getting through this record and being confronted with a scenario that was more than I could control emotionally made me realize how healthy it is to finally participate with, these things in a real way, grief or anger or whatever it is.
So you've unlocked like an emotional cage somehow.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not smart enough to have seen it.
Mhm.
I think over the years you end up just getting into habitual patterns of how you deal with things, how you protect yourself, whatever it may be. But this particular period, while I was writing Powernerd, unfortunately, and recording it, it was just I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't control my emotions in a sense, and when I felt the sadness of this scenario or the loss or the depression or whatever, it was really real for the first time. So it wasn't easy. And there was a certain period where I thought, God, is this ever going to end? Like, am I ever going to just turn on the TV and watch a show without it making me cry or something? You know what I mean? Like, but the process of dealing with these things, I think, is it happens in stages. And Powernerd as a record, I think, ended up representing those stages to me.
So having this new, kind of an emotional breakthrough in a way, do you feel that's going to benefit your songwriting now?
Oh, well, I hope so.
Like after all this time?
I hope so. I mean, I think if there's anything that's clear to me as I get older is I know less and less every day. So I can hope that that will benefit the songwriting in the future. But at the very least, what it has done is it has made it that I recognize that I don't need to fear those emotions in the ways that I have. I think that in the past I was so afraid of the ramifications of anger or the ramifications of grief that I would just either work a lot so I didn't have to think about it, or engage in other activities that were distracting, just so I wouldn't have to deal with it because I was afraid of how the pain of actually participating emotions would make me feel. But by being thrust into a scenario where I felt I had no choice but to deal with it, I recognize that not only is it not to be feared, but it's just to suppress those feelings. It's like carrying it around in a backpack. So it's better just to get rid of it.
Do you think that's why you've been so prolific in your career, is that you've been focused on music to a point where it's almost like you're shutting out everything else?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that the balance that's required for my life and my work to meet eye to eye probably wouldn't have come together in the ways that it's coming together now had I not been through this Powernerd experience.
So speaking of the record, which was the first song that got written for this record?
Knuckle Dragger.
So when you wrote that, did that kind of give you a path of where you wanted to go? Because this is a different album for you, for sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that is important to point out for me is this is one of 4 records, and they're all meant to represent different frames of mind, and very similar to how I did with Key, Addicted, Deconstruction, and Ghost. So basically, how I write is I constantly write, but I don't have an agenda when I write. I just continuously jot down ideas, I guess, and then as is tradition for my writing style, I'll have folders on my desktop that I can relegate certain piles of ideas to. And then eventually I've got enough nuggets of ideas that I can compile those folders into actual themes, aesthetics, album, and I don't judge the process that much, right? So if I have a chorus that seems like it's a commercial one, it will go on this pile. And if I have a idea that's complicated and heavy, it goes on this pile. If I have one that's sort of meditative, then that'll go on this pile. And so when Knuckle Dragger was written, it didn't as much set a pathway for the record in how it ended up turning out, but it gave me a place to start putting like ideas, and then I could compile it into what became Powernerd.
When you've got all these songs written, at what point in the whole process do you start thinking about how they sit next to each other on the record, like the track list?
Well, I think that somebody recently credited me for having like a big vision for this stuff, and I had to correct them and say, I have no idea what I'm doing. It's almost like you're in a dark room and you're looking for the light switch. So you're just kind of fumbling around. And the thing that I have got going for me, not a vision for like each chorus and the aesthetics and all this sort of thing, but from the very beginning of when these folders start turning into records, what I do have is the idea of what I want it to feel like when you're finished listening to it. So I've got a much better idea of what it isn't in the beginning than what it is.
Yeah.
And so as I start fumbling around, there'll be times where I'll go down a rabbit hole, maybe for a week sometimes, that I have to stop and say, okay, now I've lost sight of what the plot is here. And then I'll have to scrap that and then reevaluate where things are. And so much of the process is really like a puzzle, a very sort of vague puzzle. And again, the only criteria for whether or not it ends up being right for me is whether or not it feels like what it was that I was hoping I would feel like when I wrote those first ideas.
Okay.
I know it's a little convoluted, but
No, that's interesting, I think. So,
okay.
having said that, how would you want somebody to feel if somebody sat down and listened to this record from front
Yeah.
to back and
Yeah.
really listen to it? How would
Yeah.
you want them to feel by the end of it?
Okay. I think the thing is the process of how the structure of the record starts with Powernerd, which is basically a mission statement about getting through a period that's difficult. But then each song, consequent, end up, and this was not an intentional thing. This goes back to the whole looking for the light switch in the dark. It ended up being, okay, this song is about, the frustration of dealing with certain aspects of society and life and how that reflects on music. And then it goes to, well, here's your partner from a long-term relationship, and then here's your kid leaving home, and then here's somebody you care for dearly who is suffering, and then here's someone you care for who's died. And then the song Goodbye is meant to represent the acceptance of that. Because I think a lot of the process of grief includes denial to a certain point, not only of the experiences, but what you're feeling. So Goodbye is the song that ends up accepting it. And I've struggled recording the lyrics and the vocals for that song because it was just so emotionally intense for me during that time. And originally that song was going to end the record. And it ends with an ambient piece that for me was just, it's really difficult. I listened to that song and it really fucks me up. And then the ambient piece is where I feel like I am collecting myself. And originally when it was going to end, the entire record was going to end with that song, I felt it left people with just that sense of being blown apart. And if there's anything I've learned over the past couple of decades is the control over how a statement ends up being presented is entirely up to me. So I have a choice of, is that how you want to end this? Like just have this song that blows you apart. And I decided that the stages of getting through this period also included a resolution on the other side of that acceptance. So we ended the song instead with the song Ruby Quaker, which is a song about the next day and somebody coming over and saying, hey man, you look like you could use a cup of coffee. And then you're like, yeah, actually, I could use a cup of coffee. And so how I want the audience to, or how I would like in a best case scenario, the audience to leave this record feeling is that it does go on and you can get through it. And this is not done with a sense of like altruism. I'm not trying to teach or dispense benevolence or anything like that. All I'm trying to do is accurately represent the experience that I had during the writing of it, and that's what it included.
With the emotion contained in these songs, how do you feel about playing them live? Have you thought about that?
It's a different, my connection to live is maybe a little different than people who relive it consistently. After a certain amount of time, it becomes a technical exercise to me in some ways, and of course, the emotions are imbued with those exercises. But it's still, when I'm playing live, I'm thinking about the notes and I'm thinking about the articulation of it rather than reliving these things. And frankly, once I deliver a record, it's gone, right? It's when I'm working on it, it's to the exclusion of everything else, and therefore your emotions are very, very real. But once I've finished it, even as a function of sending it into the public, where there's going to be so many differing opinions, and some people are going to like it, and some people are going to dislike it, and some people love it, some people hate it. Like, I think unless you're a masochist, which I don't believe myself to be, you have to let it go after it's done, or else any criticisms of it or adulation of it is going to, unless you let it go, it's going to affect you in a way that is like unhealthy.
We mentioned 26 albums. Have you got better at signing off on the finished record? Do you know when it's done?
Yeah, when the deadline hits, right? I mean, that's not a flippant statement. It's legitimately what I use as my cutoff point, because as an imperfect perfectionist, I will just keep going on something. And in my mind, I'll be like, oh, if only I could do this, then it will be perfect. Or if only I could do this, it would be perfect. And there are certain aspects of the work that are undeniably in need of refinement. But it becomes diminishing returns at some point. So when I have a hard deadline, it allows me to let it go. Again, my next Hallmark card quote was, it's never finished. You just have to abandon it at some point. And so that's as good a time as any.
Yeah. So it seems like this album, you kind of put it out to allow you to do something next.
Yes.
What can you tell me about what's next?
Next are 3 albums that have been written at the same time, except for one of which is the next one out, and it's called The Moth. And it's basically, I've been working on it for about a decade. And it's like a musical or an opera. And it's called The Moth again, and it's basically using loosely the analogy of a caterpillar's transformation into a moth as an analogy for looking at death from a different vantage point. And I think that because Powernerd unexpectedly had a similar concept, the unification of all these 4 records, I think, will become very clear to me as the process goes on. But again, I'm still fumbling in the dark, and The Moth is the next one. I've been working on it for about a decade, and it's heavy, complicated. It's kind of like maybe a rock opera in some way, but maybe less Rocky Horror Picture and more West Side Story.
Okay, well, I'm intrigued to hear how
Yeah.
that sounds. So at this point in your career, how would you define success?
I think it's multi-tiered. One way I define success, which is what I have been able to achieve, which I'm so grateful for, is I can do whatever I want, and I do. So if I feel like making a bunch of straightforward Motorhead songs, I do it. If I feel like making an opera, I do it. If I feel like making meditation music, I do it. If I feel like making strange alien pop music, I do it. And then the second level of what I would consider to be success, which is what I'm working towards now, frankly, is true success for me is when I wake up in the morning, I have nothing I have to do.
Hmm.
That's what I'm going towards, man. So
When's the
so
last
there,
time that happened?
maybe once or twice every couple of months, I guess,
Okay.
like a Sunday every now and then you'll wake up and there's no meetings, there's no deadlines, there's no doctor's appointments, whatever it is. And I find in those moments where I can just drink coffee for 5 hours in the morning, uh, when I finally do get to work, maybe not 5 hours, but 3 hours, when I finally do get to work, it's with a sense of enthusiasm that replaces the sense of obligation. And that's the next step for me. And I'm working towards it.
Yeah, nice. Well, I hope you get that. Everything seems like it's in a good place for you at the moment. It feels like it's like a transitional kind of time in your life.
It has been.
Mm.
And now I'm starting to come out of that transitional period. And what I'm hoping is that these next 4 records and this YouTube show that I've created called the Ruby Quaker Show, which is I built a spaceship and I play ambient music. You'll see it's every bit as nerdy as it sounds. But from here, I'm hoping this will be the end of that transitional period, and now I'll start to be able to reconnect with the work and the scene. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity to work through these, frankly, very difficult personal things that have happened over the past couple years. So,
Yeah.
thanks to the audience.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wish you all the best with what's coming up. And it's good to see you still being super creative.
Yeah.
And hopefully we'll see you in a live environment before too long.
Where are you located right now?
I'm in Montreal.
That's what I had wondered. Yeah, yeah. Well, it's great to see you, brother. And thanks again. I'll talk to you soon.